Today we're animating a spooky skull in Procreate, complete with a fire and smoke soft transition that goes from text to a revealed skull surprise. The color palette for this project is free as always. Just tap on the link in the video description and you can download and install it. I'm going to start by creating a brand new canvas. I've listed my specs on screen, and let's begin. This week's tutorial is brought to you by Envato Elements, which is kind of like the Netflix of graphic design. They have tens of thousands of resources available to artists, including stock photos, presentation templates, audio tracks, logos, fonts, and my favorite, Procreate brushes. We're actually going to be using a set from their library for this week's tutorial, and they've generously offered every Tuesday subscribers with a 70% off coupon, which makes it less than $10 a month to try out. It's limited time though, so tap on the link in the video description to grab your coupon, and let's go download our brushes. So up here in the top search bar, toggle this down and choose add-ons, and then in the search bar, type in fire. You'll see a bunch of stuff show up. So over here with your filters, change the filter to brushes and then to Procreate, and it will be this one right here in the middle. So I'm going to tap on that and then hit download, and let's install this one, and then we'll go grab our skull brush. Okay, I've got my fire brush all installed, so now let's go pick up a skull brush. So over here, once again, toggle down, choose add-ons, and type in skull. The links for these are also right in the video description, and you can toggle this over again. It should have kept your settings though, and you could really use any of these. We basically just need a front-facing skull. The actual graphic isn't going to be a part of our final artwork, so you can choose any of these. The one that I chose was this one right here. So I'm going to download and install this one as well. Okay, I've got my brand new canvas. We're working in a slightly different format this week. So it's 1080 by 1920 pixels. And that is because this is an animation, so it's probably more likely to be used as a reel on Instagram than it would be as a square graphic. So once you have your canvas all set, let's apply a background color. So come into your layers, tap on background color, and it's going to be the darkest blue color. And then we're just going to, on this very first layer, keep the dark color selected, and we're going to grab our fire brush first. So you could really use any of these fire brushes that you'd like. I'm going to stick with Fire 01, and I'm just going to write out spooky down here. It may help to have some guidelines turned on since this is so dark, just to keep everything really straight. So I'm going to go to Canvas, toggle on Drawing Guide, Edit Drawing Guide, and up here on the rainbow slider, I'm just going to choose a lighter color so I can see my guides a little bit better, increase the opacity and the thickness, and then hit done. I just leave it at the default size right here. I just need some straight lines to keep my lettering straight. Okay, you could use typable text here as well, but you'll lose the effect that the fire gives off. And then write out whatever word that you'd like down here. I'm going to move this into place. I'm going to scale it down just a little bit, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of room at the bottom. I'm not going to make it super tight to the bottom. And now I'm going to create a brand new layer, and I'm going to grab my lighter blue color and then head into my skulls brush set. And the one I'm using is Skull 7. You may need to adjust the size a little bit. We'll see how this comes in. And let me zoom out so we can kind of get an idea. This is what's going to be revealed in our animation. So I want a little space. So once this transitions around the skull, I want some room for the smoke that we're going to create to come off of the skull. So that's why I don't have the skull super tight to the top. I think this is pretty good right there. Now we're ready to animate everything. And in order to get all of this set up so we can animate pretty quickly, let's turn off our guides. And then right here, wrench, canvas, you want to toggle on animation assist. And down here, you'll see we've got our two layers, the spooky layer and then the skull layer. So the skull layer, we need to set this temporarily as our foreground. That way it stays ever present. That way we can move and manipulate the smoke or fire around it. So I'm just going to tap on this little thumbnail down here and toggle on foreground, and everything else is completely fine. We're going to adjust our settings just slightly. I'm going to change my frames per second down to 12, and onion skin frames, I'm going to toggle this down to 1 and reduce the onion skin opacity to like 25%. So the onion skin frames just allows you to see the previous layers before it, and it can get really confusing if you have more than one, so that's why I keep it at 1. And this is the opacity, how brightly those previous layers show up when you create your new animation on top of it. Okay, we are ready to go. So I've got my first layer, and I want my lettering to be super, super clear on this first layer. So now I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to grab my smudge brush and tap on the smudge brush and come back into your fire set. And you can choose any of these fire options. They're all pretty cool, but I'm going to stick with fire 1 for this. And I have it set pretty large. I'm up to like 60% here. And what you want to do is slowly push the tops of the letters up and the bottoms of the letters up. So it's kind of, even though it's written with fire, it's turning into smoke and it's going to come around our skull. But we need this to be a slow transition. We don't want it to be over with in like a second, because if we use this as a reel, we want to entertain people a little bit longer than that. So I'm just going to go a little bit at a time, and you can see how it's starting to pull up and it's giving us a little bit of a smoky feel on that, and then push the bottoms up just a little bit here. Now we're going to duplicate that layer and then continue working, just pushing it up a little bit more. And it's going to be really tempting to push more at a time so you can preview things, but you want to resist because we want this animation to be long enough where it can entertain for longer than a couple seconds. All right, duplicate it again, and I'm just going to keep doing this, and once I get to the skull, then we'll talk about what's going to happen there. And I'm slowly, with the S and the Y, I'm slowly going to be pushing those closer to the skull instead of going straight up with those. The P, O, O, and K, I'm going straight up, but because the Y and the S are on the edges, I want them to kind of move around the skull instead of straight up. So I'm keeping that in mind as I start smudging these up. I'm going to begin pushing them closer to the skull. Okay, I'm starting to run into the skull now, so I want to show you what's going to happen here. Let's first preview what we've got. So if we just hit play down here, we can see what our animation looks like, and you can see it's a pretty cool effect already. And we can slow it down if we want to see it move a little slower since we don't have a ton of frames yet. So you can see that gradual shift. Okay, let's bring this back up to 12. And I'm going to make sure down here your frames wherever you stopped it. Let's go all the way to the end. And now we're going to duplicate the last layer we did again. I still have my smudge tool selected, and I'm going to start moving around the skull. So these outer edges that have been smudged up, I'm still lifting from the bottom, but up near the top, I'm going to go around the contour of the skull. And if you push into the skull too much, just push back. And you can reduce your smudge tool too if you need a more precise push. So just keep that in mind. We want to make sure that it appears as a skull, and if we push too much of the smoke into the skull, it's not going to read right. And just think about how smoke would flow if it hits something. So if it's hitting this edge, it's going to go around it, so then I can start pushing it as it would normally behave. So up here, when I'm hitting from the bottom, the teeth part, I'm just going to start moving in this direction for this side and this direction for this side. And we're going to keep pushing that color. You want to make sure you've got enough color so the viewer understands what's happening here. And we're going to start going around the skull. And I want to show you what happens when we get to the nose and the eyes. So I'm going to do one more like this where I'm pushing up around the contour, and then I'm going to introduce the eyes and the nose since it's starting, the darkest or the brightest part of this is starting to push into that part of the skull. So I'm going to duplicate, push this up again. The important thing is we want to give this a sense of movement because the smoke is constantly swirling and moving. Let's see how that looks. Okay, let's go to the end, and I'm going to duplicate this. And now what I'm going to do is grab my brush again, still using the same fire brush as before, and I'm just going to put a little dot at the bottom of the nose. We can even reduce the opacity of the skull now so we can see this fire in here. So I'm putting a little bit of fire at the bottom of the nose and a little bit of fire at the base of the eye cavities. I'm just giving myself enough pigment to push with the smudge tool. So we can't leave these like this right now. We need to be able to smudge them. Since we have this new layer, I can go back to my smudge tool and I'm going to push these up a little bit and soften the bottom part. We don't want that to be too hard here. And we're just going to start smudging these with everything else. And it's okay for the pigment that's in the eyes and the nose to go straight through the skull. It's actually a pretty cool effect, but we want to make sure that the contours of the skull externally, that the smoke continues to go around them, and the only thing that's going through the skull is whatever's in the eyes and the nose. So let me just soften these a little bit more. I don't want it to look like it's too bright compared to everything else. And I'm going to continue pushing this up and around the skull, and as it gets towards the top, I'm going to have it come up like this. So it's going to come around and then come up. All right, let's duplicate this. We'll do a couple more like this and then we'll preview and see how it looks. So it's obviously a ton of repetition, but stick with it. I know how tedious it can be, but the reveal is super cool the more layers that you have. So let's preview what we've got, but let's turn off the skull this time so we can get an idea of the full effect and just see how it's coming together and see if there's any areas that we need to start paying more attention to. So we'll hit play. So it's looking really cool, especially the eyes and the nose right now. All right, so let's continue working, and I'm just going to go the rest of the way and finish this up. So I will speed up the video. I've turned off my skull now, and we can fully preview what we've done. So let's hit play. I think I want the last frame to stay completely dark just a little bit longer. So in order to do that, let's come to the last frame and we can just tap on it. And for hold duration, I'm going to choose 2 right here, and we'll see how that feels. So that's just taking the last frame and extending it 2 more frames without me having to duplicate that layer in the layers palette. So I can hit play, and I just want it to end before it begins, so it's not so abrupt with beginning again. And I actually think I can make it go 1 more frame. So let's tap on that last frame again and choose 3 here. This can also extend the length of your animation if you need it to last just a little bit longer. And depending on how fast it's moving, or if you just need your animation to last a little bit longer, there's a few things you can do to extend it if it's too short. So if I hit settings right here, we can do ping pong. That will definitely make it last longer, because in order for it to fully play through, it's going to go all the way up and then come all the way back down. But if you don't like that, like I don't necessarily like it going back and forth, even though it does look pretty cool, I can just change this back to loop, but reduce my frames per second. That will also lengthen the amount of time that the animation plays for. And then the other thing is just adding in more layers. The more layers you have, the longer your animation by default. So let's see what 8 frames per second feels like and see if we want it to go that slow or if it's too slow. It actually feels kind of spooky like that. I think I want it to be just a little bit faster though. Let's go to 10. I think that feels pretty good. Okay, so now all we have to do is export it. If you want to post this as a reel, you can export this as an MP4. If you're just posting as like a regular post on Instagram, if you chose a different format for yours, then you want to export as an animated GIF, and you want to make sure that that is at least 3 seconds long. Okay, so I'm going to hit the wrench, share, and choose animated MP4, since this is going to be a video that I would intend to have posted within a reel, and that looks good. So now all you have to do is hit export. If you want to adjust your frames per second again or preview other speeds, you can adjust that still in the export screen. So then you just hit export, and then I save the video right here so it's saved to my camera roll, and then I can upload it immediately to a reel or story or however you'd like to share it. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you next time.